The February 16th meeting of the Harbor Commission will come to order. Mary, would you call the roll, please?
Betsy Kramer.
Here.
Bill Spicer. Here. Corey Bantalan. Here. Eric Friedman. Here. Frank Kelly. Here. Jim Sloan. Here. Helene Webb. Here. Thank you.
Mr. Friedman, are there any changes to the agenda this evening?
Madam Chair, there are no changes to the agenda this evening.
And this is the time for public comment and for anyone who wants to speak about something that's not on the agenda. And we have one slip, Julia Parker, who's got a telephone going there. She's with the Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network, and she wants to give an update on the California brown pelicans that were attacked and maimed in the harbor area. Julia? Thanks.
Hello, my name is Julia Parker. I'm the Director of Animal Affairs for the Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network. And I'm sure you all know about us. We're incorporated in 1988, and we rescue approximately 3,000 animals per year, wildlife, seabirds, and small mammals. This year we had a really disturbing beginning to our seabird rescue operations. 6 California brown pelicans were found between January 10th and 19th, maimed severely in a way that would not have been a natural occurrence. Basically, it looked like someone had taken their one of their wings and just cracked it over a 2x4 with bones exposed and beyond any repair. The birds were found washed up on shore, 3 at the East Beach area, 2 in the harbor area, and then a 6th bird was found in Oxnard about a month ago. The birds were alive when they were found by members of the public who walk their dogs on the beach. They called our center, and rescuers were sent down to transport the animals. Unfortunately, all the animals were euthanized about immediately as soon as they could be taken to either Care Emergency Hospital or the Cat and Bird Clinic, 2 of the veterinarians in town that help us out. Needless to say, it's a horrendous and horrific-looking injury. We've had excellent coverage from the media, from the newspapers, the Independent, the Santa Barbara News Press, the Daily Sound, and the Ventura Star, and I believe there are a couple other stories coming out this week, just updates, and it was also covered on KEYT. Volunteers are currently distributing 75 flyers in hopes of bringing awareness to the public that it is illegal to harm wildlife, especially an animal that is on the threatened list, as is the California brown pelican. There are federal regulations and state regulations that protect these birds, and volunteers are offering a $1,500 reward for any information that can lead to the prosecution of the perpetrators. And probably most of you know about this because we have gotten really good coverage, but I just wanted to be here today and share the information with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions, comments? Julia, what should people do if they see a seabird?
If they see an injured seabird, they should call our center at 805-681-1080. And we will send out rescuers or transporters to get the animal some veterinarian help.
Great, thank you very much. Now we're moving on to the approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes for the January 19th meeting? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Next is the department update. Scott, would you give the director's report, please?
Sure. Good evening, Madam Chair, good commissioners. We've had 2 council actions since we met last. Lease was approved, 5-year lease agreement with Madam Rosinka's palm reading operation out on the Stearns Wharf. And a 5-year lease agreement was also approved with the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History Ty Warner Sea Center for a small second-floor office and mostly storage space also out on the wharf. And some tentative agenda items for the March meeting are a lease agreement with the Harbor Market, and then we intend to bring you the final 2013 budget recommendation at that meeting as well. And that concludes the director's report.
Short and sweet, thank you very much. And on now to the facilities management report.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Construction began last week on the easterly section of the launch ramp. This is a project that's funded by the Boating Trails Program, which is administered by the Department of Boating and Waterways, and it funds projects that improve facilities for non-motorized vessels, primarily along rivers where there's haul-outs for kayaks and river rafting and that type of stuff. We were fortunate to receive a $450,000 grant a couple of years ago to make these improvements that are specifically designed to help non-motorized vessels such as kayaks, stand-up paddle boards, small sailboats, and outrigger canoes. The old docks were built in the 1960s on the easterly and westerly sections, specifically this section you see outlined there. In the new design, the improvements include a non-skid surface that's not quite as coarse and rough as along the existing boarding floats, something that's somewhat barefoot friendly. It provides traction for trailers launching small vessels. And it also has a small boarding float, not quite in that location, but close to it. And the boarding float has about a 6-inch freeboard, so it's really easy to step off and into a kayak or a stand-up paddleboard or something like that. The project got started last week, and they're currently in the middle of demolishing the old ramp, which should be finished next week. There's a fair amount of site preparation after that that's involved that includes putting down some new bedding material in these grade beams to stabilize the new, what will be pre-cast concrete panels, which will be placed somewhere around the middle of March. And those are the panels that have the V grooves on them where the actual launching takes place. The top of the ramp will be cast in place and have a little an abutment that will go into this new dock that I described, which will be the very last component of the project, probably about the first week in April. Ooh, we're missing a slide here. We received 6 bids for the project, with Shaw Construction submitting a low bid of $375,000. The engineering fees for a project like this are on order of about $45,000, with another $20,000 in cost for inspection and material testing. So it looks like we're going to sneak in just under the grant amount, assuming there aren't any significant change orders. So far, we've had no surprises. They've peeled up most of the old launch ramp, and we did one coring, and sure enough, there's 20 inches of concrete that pretty thick, pretty solid, that have lasted almost over 50 years now. But so far, no surprises, and we're pretty pleased with the progress we're making. The next project I'd like to talk about tonight is the Marina 2 redecking project. This is a project we've been working on since 2008 to replace fingers, one finger at a time, in Marina 2. Our staff has done the design for 20, 25, 35, and 45-foot fingers, and they also do the construction themselves. So this is a project completely done in-house. And what's unique and interesting about it is they ordered a few concrete floats in advance, and they build the docks in our maintenance yard before removing the old one. But part of the project, and the biggest challenge, of course, is to load and offload new docks. So my staff developed and invented this creative push-me-pull-you trailer that, when I click this, is going to show how you take a dock out of the marina without hiring a rather expensive crane. Pulls it right out, and the pull-you part of it attaches that way, and they can snake through all the parking lots. So, and this is just an incredibly cost-effective way to take on this particular project, and a very creative approach to this sort of a problem. We've been working on this for quite some time now, and it's a somewhat phased approach. We started at the easterly end in 2008 and have worked our way through, and we're working our way into the 20-foot slips, which we'll complete this year, and should get through the remainder of the slips next year, which will result in pretty much a complete rebuild over the course of 6 years. By way of comparison for costs, we've totaled up all our costs, labor, materials, and everything for the Marina 2 redecking. And our costs range from about $45 to $53 a square foot. And that really varies based on the bigger docks cost a little more, the smaller docks cost a little bit less. By way of comparison, Marina 3B Entai and the accommodation dock were built by a contractor last year, went out to bid, received low bids, and was $82 a square foot for the 3BN type project and $111 for the accommodation dock, which was a bit more complicated with utilities and a few other things. So this particular project's been very successful, very cost effective, and we're excited about finishing up Marina 2 next year and probably moving on to Marina 3 and eventually over to Marina 4. And finally this evening, we're going to be starting the annual pile driving project on Stearns Wharf next week. Every year we replace anywhere from about 10 to 30 piles, and this year we have 16 piles to replace. One of the difficulties with this project is a lot of the work is done in the roadway, and you can see these roadway pile locations, which requires night work. Night work's a bit disturbing, but there's no other way to install these piles other than to close the wharf, which would be very, very disruptive. There's many thousands of people that go out there every day, even in the winter on not a very nice day. And this winter's been remarkable, and it's packed every single day. So we'll be starting probably the week after next, the night work will begin. We have a couple of splice piles. I talked about this earlier this year. We did a few of those under the Harbor Restaurant elevator shaft. We saw some extreme damage during our inspections, and these are challenging piles to install and must be used this method underneath the buildings. And then we've got a couple just regular piles that are installed in the day. We also have 170 foot of pile caps and stringers and deck boards, which is part of the typical project that lasts for about a month and a half this time of the year, scheduled for sort of the latter part of winter, so that if we do get some late season storms, we can add work to it, because frequently we'll get a big swell coming up in the next month or so, and a few more piles will get lost, and we'll include that in the contract. The annual budget is $300,000 for this project. We only received 2 bids this year, but Cushman Construction Company submitted a low bid of $123,000, pretty typical. We've had emergency repairs on the order of $45,000 this year, and we purchase materials separately and provide them to the contractor. So we're a little over $250,000 this year. We'll probably sneak up close to the $300,000 by the end of the year. And this is the most we've spent out of the budget on this project for about 2 or 3 years. We've been really lucky. It's been pretty mild, and we've been able to carry over a few funds. So should be done in a few weeks, and we'll continue to maintain the structural integrity of the wharf. And this concludes my presentation this evening.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner comments, questions? Commissioner Kelly.
Thank you. Carl, on the materials that are being used in the Marina 2 rebuild, are we using the traditional wood materials, or I'm sure you've looked into them, any of the alternatives to that, what would you call them, the plastique? If you want to make a comment on that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kelly, it's an old wooden marina built in the 60s, somewhat replaced in the 1980s, and since we're doing finger by finger, we've stuck with wood. We did look at using some recycled plastic as an alternative material, because it's a fairly easy transition to do, but recycled plastic is very, very heavy, and it doesn't float the same, so we haven't pursued that. Wood's pretty inexpensive and available, and it's still an excellent building product. So we have looked, but it just doesn't seem like the right fit or a transition when we're building it out this way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? There's no other comments, questions? Thank you very much, Carl. And now on to the Harbor Operations Report. Mick, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I have an enforcement report for you this evening. In recent months, we've seen a rather alarming frequency of ponga sightings, beachings, and what have you, up and down the California coast, and especially in our region in the Southern California area, and even closer to home along the Gaviota coast and some down around the Ventura area. And as recently as last week, one showed up a half a mile off of Montecito. Pongas, if you're not familiar with them, are if you've ever done any coastal fishing down in Mexico, they're the classic open, outboard-powered Mexican fishing boat. And in this case, they're being used to smuggle human cargo, people, and primarily marijuana, though cocaine has also been smuggled into California in recent months. Last July 15th, we actually got a cell phone call from Santa Cruz Island. There were 15 stranded Mexican nationals out on Santa Cruz who were abandoned out there, and Harbor Patrol actually, I think you remember reporting on this, was involved in ensuring their health and welfare while they were being transported to another facility. The boats themselves are being taken to a local storage yard and then immediately transported down to San Juan Capistrano, where the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement folks are keeping them. But a couple of notes on these. Just recently, as you'll see in that bottom picture, just last week, as a matter of fact, a 100-pound bale of pot, which is one of the other cargoes of choice for these for the smugglers, was floating off one of our oil platforms, and the oil-filled crew boat Allen T picked it up and brought it in, and we turned it over to the appropriate authorities. But the key message here is that if people on the ocean, boaters, see a panga floating on the ocean, don't go near it. These pangas and these bales of contraband are the tools and products of an illegal international enterprise. And if you see a panga on the ocean, the smartest thing to do is call the Coast Guard on VHF radio, and of course you can call Harbor Patrol on Channel 16 if you're in our vicinity. Both would probably respond. And if you spot one on the beach, the smartest thing to do is either call 911 or call, and it doesn't show up too well on here, but to call directly the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement folks, who can be reached at 1-866-347-2423. Maybe that shows up a little better on TV. That's 1-866-247-2423. And as I mentioned, and I want to emphasize, the frequency with which we're seeing the pangas is increasing, not decreasing. I can count off the top of my head a dozen of these in our region in the last 6 months, and so it seems to be on the uptick, and it's something to be aware of, but it's also something to stay away from if you see them on the beach or see them on the ocean. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner Spicer.
Mick, I know you're a fisherman. Are these boats, they're rare for our waters? I mean, if we see them, are you indicating that most likely it's illegal activity?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Spicer, it's a great question. Thank you. I wouldn't say they're rare. They're unusual. We have one commercial fisherman in Santa Barbara who dives urchins out of a panga. And so I think, before pushing the alarm button, you might want to take a look through the binoculars and make sure it's not a local diver working. I appreciate that thought. But in general, if it's abandoned or if there are a whole lot of people on it, especially if there are a whole lot of people on it wearing life jackets, it's more likely to be a product of this criminal trade. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much for your report, Nick. And so now we're moving rapidly on to new business. The first item of new business is item number 5, the lease agreement with the UCSB sailing facility. And Mary, would you read the staff recommendation, please?
That Harbor Commission recommend council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with one 5-year option with the Regents of the University of California at a monthly rent of $1,998.40 for approximately 5,467 square feet of water area adjacent to the sea landing rock groin in the Santa Barbara Harbor.
Any comment, questions? And if not, do we have a motion to approve? Oh, sorry, excuse me.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Harbor Commissioners. The Regents of the University of California have leased dock space from the City of Santa Barbara since 1970. The site's used for education, research, and recreational sailing activities by UCSB's Department of Exercise and Sports Activities. During the start of the school year, it's quite a sight to see a number of the students heading out on their little FJs, which are flying junior sailboats, and you're praying that they don't run into each other or flip over, but inevitably they do. And they survive in spite of themselves. And perhaps that's one of those valuable lessons learned, how to help your fellow sailor right the vessel or help one another out of the water. It builds camaraderie, trust, and reminds us to laugh and enjoy life. Now, occasionally the students from Westmont College or Santa Barbara City College will use the facilities with UCSB's consent, and thus extending the educational hand of opportunity to others. The term proposed is for a one 5-year term with one 5-year option, with the rent to be adjusted annually by the CPI. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Now, are there any comments, questions?
I make a motion that we approve the lease agreement.
Second? I have a question. Oh, Commissioner Sloan.
Do they sublease any of that space to anybody else?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, they do not. In the previous agreement, they had the ability to sublease to NOAA. There was a time when NOAA wanted to use some of that dock space for its research vessel, but the Shearwater came in and was much too large, and we accommodated the Baena elsewhere when it was in the harbor. The Cormorant, the yellow vessel that you see there, is a UCSB research vessel. So it's all UCSB vessels and property there.
Okay, thank you. Frank, do you want to repeat your motion?
Just, I recommend that we accept the agreement as proposed.
And I'll second it.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. The next item, new business, is the office lease agreement with Mike Pizell. And Mary, would you please read the staff recommendation?
That Harbor Commission recommend council approval of a one-year lease agreement with a one-year option with Mike Pizell at a monthly rent of $417 or 6% of gross sales, whichever is greater, for Marine Surveyor's Office at 125 Harbor Way, Suite 23.
Mr. Henry.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Mike Pizell has leased the second-floor office space at 125 Harbor Way since March of 2008. Mike is not known for sitting on his laurels. Most of the time, you will find Mike out in the boatyard or in the marina, most often below a boat, sitting in the slings of the travel hoist, tap, tap, tapping on the hull. I'm sure he's praying that nobody taps back. But Mike has taught classes in navigation, anchoring, boat handling in the harbor. That's how to dock your boat without running into anybody else's, and something that your neighbors will surely appreciate. And, of course, emergency boat procedures, which is a very important class if you're a boater. So keep in mind, Mike, for your next boat survey, just give him a call and he'll meet you at your boat. He's considered a tenant in good standing with no lease problems on file. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Comments, questions? A motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Second? Seconded by, all those in favor?
Aye.
Have a lease agreement. Now, on to the next item of new business is the budget update, fiscal year budget update.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, receive a report on the fiscal year 2013 budget, including approved fee increases, projected revenue and expenses, and capital projects, and B, receive a report from the Harbor Commission Budget Committee meeting.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, tonight's budget presentation is basically an update, and we've had some of these items change even since the report was written last week, so I'll go through some of those as we go through the report. We'll take your comments at the conclusion and bring back the full recommendation next month. We'll start the presentation with the current year-to-date revenue, which we reviewed last month. Update that to the current February numbers. And then we'll look at the fiscal year 2013 budget projections, both revenue and expense, capital projects scheduled, the approved fee increases that the council approved as part of the budget last year, reserve balances, and some debt service information that the Harbor Commission Budget Committee recommended looking at last week's meeting. Next. This is a quick look at the mid-year revenue as of December 31st compared to last year, the same time period. We saw this at the January meeting. Just suffice it to say the overall revenue is up 10% over last year. Property management's up, parking services is up 10% overall, and marina management 6.5%. So about 10% overall. Something that kind of jumps out of that is the workers' compensation rebate, which we have not seen before. And this was, just a word about that, risk management has a reserve set aside to pay for workers' compensation claims. And citywide, the trend in work comp claims has been less claims and claims of a smaller dollar amount. So the actuary looked at the reserve that the city had maintained and determined that it was not necessary to have that large of a reserve given this trend, declining trend in claims and declining dollar amount of the claims, and so decided that it would be appropriate to distribute it out to all the city departments. So the waterfront department shares on the magnitude of $450,000 or so. So that's what that's all about. Some of the reasons that the work comp claims have been reduced in cost is that the city has gotten pretty aggressive about putting injured workers back to work as early as possible on modified duty, sometimes called light duty. And one of the ways we've accommodated this is, for instance, a maintenance worker, we may put him to work in a parking kiosk when the doctor clears him to do such work, and he may spend a couple of weeks or a month finishing his recuperation but working, and that gets him off the couch watching the reruns of Gilligan's Island and gets him off the work comp and back to work. And that's been very effective doing that method. Next. In terms of mid-year revenue, again, we've seen some favorable trends. We've mentioned it a lot that last summer was the phenomenal weather from last summer has been reflected in our property management and our parking revenue. The weather has continued on through the fall and the winter. And so we're seeing, as of yesterday, our property management revenue is up 7% over last year. Parking's up 10% over last year. The Luke Pace parking stations in the Harbor West lot, while parking's up 10% overall, the Luke stations installed on July 1st are up 36% over last year, or $20,000, meaning the first two pay stations have virtually almost paid for themselves in the first 7.5 months of this fiscal year. So we're liking that. Slip transfer fee revenue is also up 37%, or $103,000 over the mid-year last year, and we have processed $82,550 more of slip transfer fees since January 1st. So that trend is continuing, these favorable trends. Okay, for the fiscal year 2013 budget, technically it's not a full budget like we would in the normal sense. This is what we would call a mid-cycle review, where we open it up and look at little tweaks that need to be adjusted in the midterm, in the mid-cycle. So we're in the second year of a 2-year budget, and the budget and the fees were approved by council in June of 2011. No increases in permanent staffing are being proposed, although we have one reclassification request pending for changing a parking coordinator position, an assistant parking coordinator position to a full coordinator position. That's still pending through HR. They're working through the financial details of that, and we haven't heard back on that yet, but we will by next month. The likely elimination of unpaid furlough, which you'll see looks like an increase in the salaries and benefits line item in a moment, but what it is it's the elimination of the furlough that we've been dealing with for the last several years. Looking forward to not having that this next fiscal year. And then you'll see that increasing debt service due to the Marina One loan and additional draws on the Marina One loan. So this is a preliminary list of the expenditures, a summary of the expenditures we're looking at for 2013. As I mentioned, the salaries and benefits line item appears to be has a $250,000 variance there, but again, that's virtually entirely due to the elimination of the furlough. Supplies and services going up just slightly. Capital outlay transfer going up $136,000. That's simply a function of more capital projects scheduled for 2013 than we had in 2012. Debt service again going up because of the Department of Boating and Waterways additional draws on that loan. And that's the gist of it. The total expenditures with capital outlay is $12,468,000, but without the capital outlay, the actual operating budget number is $11,398,000, or about a 3.2% increase over fiscal year 2012 altogether. Okay, moving on to the revenue side of the equation. This is similar to the chart that's in your packet, and it's based on the fiscal year 2012 projections that we extrapolated out and presented to you at the January meeting. This is not the fiscal year 2012 budget numbers. These are the fiscal year 2012 expected or projected, factoring in these increases we've seen in parking revenue, property management revenue, and so forth. So we're looking at we're looking at overall about a 3.7% decline in revenue. And you can see that that's about $466,000. It's almost entirely due to that one-time money, the work comp rebate that we won't see next year. We're also seeing some negative variances in the parking services. You can see about $18,000. And that's primarily due to, in the La Playas, we had an anomaly this year. Generally, the La Playa lots are run by City College, and we receive very little revenue from them, generally under $20,000. And this year it was up over $30,000. So we didn't want to budget based on that anomaly. So that's why the discrepancy between the projected 2012 revenue and the budgeted 2013 revenue is primarily the La Playa lots. And similarly, in marina management, even though we predict we'll be getting over $500,000 in slip transfer fee revenue by year end, we're not going to budget that amount next year because, as you'll recall, that's been fluctuating quite dramatically. So we're leaving that at $450,000 for our budget. So that's the difference there in marina management and parking. So we're budgeting $466,000 less revenue than the FY 2012 year-end projection, and that's about 1.7% or $200,000 less than the actual FY 2012 budget. So that's the disconnect between the budget and the projection. Okay, I just explained the negative variances in the financial management. The Commission asked for additional information, which is attached in your packet, but basically the interest revenue we're seeing is about 1.7% on the city's investments due to the nature of those investments. So we'll continue to see that downward trend. And I just explained the La Playa lots and the slip transfer issue. Moving on to the capital projects. The capital projects are funded from surplus revenue or reserves above policy building up in our operating fund. Any additional monies needed to fund the capital projects come from our capital reserve, also known as the Harbor Preservation Fund. And then, of course, we've been reporting to you on the various state grants. Carl's been working on the 2 for the launch ramp, and then, of course, additional funding from the Department of Boating and Waterways loan. And we currently have $1.3 million in reserves above policy as of June 30th, 2011. So we could fund, without dipping into the capital reserve, we could fund the reserves that we have scheduled currently, which are continuation of the Marina 1 dock replacement and additional drawdown of the $1.9 million loan, which should take place shortly after July 1st. Ongoing marina renovation. These are annual, yearly projects. Parking lot, slurry sealing, and striping. The Stearns Wharf timber replacement, Carl explained to you, which is a yearly thing. Harbor restroom ADA remodel, which we've been gradually going through. We did Marina 3 last year. We plan on doing the restrooms in the 119 building underneath Brophy's this next fiscal year. Seawall ADA handrail and sidewalk replacement. And the last couple are further phases of the self-pay parking system known as the Luke system. The breakwater lights is on the schedule for next fiscal year, and the subtotal of that is $2.9 million in projects, but again, with the D-ball loan providing $1.9 million, waterfront's going out of pocket about $1,070,000. As discussed at the Budget Committee meeting last week, we primarily focused on changes to the capital projects. So next month we'll bring you some deletions and additions to these capital projects and the justifications for that. But we already made one run at the Budget Committee with these issues, and I believe the members of the Budget Committee may want to report out on the subject of that discussion at the end of this report. Go ahead. Of course, the big ticket item is the continuation of Marina 1. $1.9 million will consist of the replacement of M and L finger, the blue shading or the fingers in headwalk that have already been done, and then also the addition of, a half a dozen docks, Carl? Eight slips in in F finger in Marina 1, which is that little orangish shading further in. So we'll be able to get a little more slip revenue once we build those out and add to that open water space. Not proposing any changes to the fee increases. just to what was approved last year, a slip transfer fee increase of $25 a foot, except for the 20-foot slips, and a 2% slip fee increase, down from the last several years where we saw a 4% increase, followed by a 4% increase, followed by a 2% increase, which would be this fiscal year. Just a quick note on the 6-year cash flow. We are anticipating revenue growth of 2% per year. That's pretty standard. The slip transfer fee and the slip fees, $2.9 million capital program, less the Department of Boating and Waterways loan, for an out-of-pocket cost of $1,070,000. Something to keep in mind is our operating fund debt coverage ratio to remain in compliance with our loans with the Department of Boating and Waterways and our certificates of participation. We need to maintain a debt service coverage ratio of 1.5, which we stay just above that until the out years, 2017 and 2018, where it dips to 1.49 in our 6-year cash flow model. But that's in the out years, and so we can make adjustments as we get closer to that to make sure we stay above 1.5. So that's looking okay in our cash flow model. Additionally, this is the operating revenue versus operating expenses. Fortunately, those lines are not crossing. The top line represents the operating revenue, and I believe that 2012, on the left of the screen there, I believe that jump there is due to the 450,000 workers' comp rebate is probably why we have that jump right there. So the operating revenues will stay, according to plan, ahead of the operating expenses as they should. Next month, we'll be bringing forward some more information on the waterfront reserves, but basically we have 2 operating reserves: the reserve for economic contingencies or emergencies. These are unexpected things, storm damage or something that may occur or fire that may occur. That's 15% of our operating budget is automatically stored in this reserve for economic contingencies. The other operating reserve is the reserve for future years' budget, which is what the general fund you've been reading about. The general fund has been dipping into since they've had the tax revenue shortfall. So we haven't had to do that, waterfront being an enterprise. So that's 10% of the operating budget. So right off the top, we have to save 25% of the operating budget in these 2 operating reserves. In addition to that, we have the capital reserve, which is the Harbor Preservation Fund, which we're required to maintain at least $2 million, between $2 and $5 million. And next month, the Budget Committee had some questions on these reserves. I've got all the background, and we'll attach that to next month's packet and go into the details of which ones are the more greater priority than others and so forth. And this is just a graphic of the reserves, missing the red line. There it is. The darker green shading is the Harbor Preservation Fund moving forward, and the red line is the $2 million minimum limit that we have to maintain. And then the lighter green shading is the operating reserves I mentioned that are just strictly a function of 25% of the operating budget. So those are our reserve balances. They remain healthy according to this current cash flow model, with $2.5 million in the Harbor Preservation Fund in the outlying years, and total reserves in 2017 of $5.2 million. Go ahead. So just to summarize the FY 2013 budget, $11.9 million, almost $12 million in revenue, operating expenditures of $11.4 million, net capital projects after the D-ball loan of $1,070,000, and the reserves are maintained within the policy minimums, not having to dip into the reserves. Go ahead. Oh, okay. The Budget Committee asked for some additional information on the Waterfront Department's debt service obligations. The biggest one is the certificates of participation, which was a bond issue that was done in 2002. We have it was $19 million at the time. We have $13,800,000 remaining outstanding, 15 years remaining on that loan. It's 5% at 25 years amortization, and we are able to refinance that in the upcoming fiscal year 2013. We've had a brief conversation with the finance director, Carl and I did, about refinancing the bond. It does not appear it will be practical to, say, roll the Department of Boating and Waterways loan into that or pull any money out for construction, but it is feasible to refinance that and reduce our debt service payment by about $134,000 a year. So that's money saved. We'll pursue that if at all possible. The next loan is a general fund loan from damage to Stearns Wharf that occurred quite a long time ago. It used to be a interest-free loan, and that was changed a few years back, and just a year or two ago, and it was converted to a 6% loan with a 20-year amortization, 16 years remaining on that one, and $1.1 million. The second general fund loan you see there again is 6%, amortized over 30 years, $1.5 million outstanding on that and 24 years remaining, and that was for a $1.7 million loan to partially fund the remodel and expansion of the Chandlery building to accommodate West Marine and the waterfront administration offices with Harbor Patrol. We talked at the Budget Committee about, these were decent interest rates at the time. Obviously, that's no longer the case. We talked at the Budget Committee meeting about looking at maybe these general fund loans and seeing if we could pay one down or make some big principal payments against it. I spoke with Jim Armstrong about that this morning, and the preferable one to pay down would be the second general fund loan, the $1.5 million. So we'll be talking with the finance director about ways in which we could do that, and looking at our 6-year cash flow projection and seeing if we can squeeze out 3 payments of $500,000 or something. And if we were to pay that down, it would save us $1.4 million in interest payments over the next 24 years. So I think, and $123,000 a year. So we'll be looking into that as well. And then finally, the Department of Boating and Waterways loan is a 4.5% fixed over 30 years amortization. To date, we've had $7.4 million approved from the Department of Boating and Waterways, but it functions like a home equity line of credit. We've only drawn $3 million to date to pay for the Marina One rebuilding. So Department of Boating and Waterways only requires an interest payment while the project is being built. But Carl's been having discussions with them. We want to get paying down this principal as soon as possible. So we've been budgeting for interest and principal, and they're going to let us begin paying principal and interest early. We want to get the payments started on this loan, and we've budgeted $332,000 in the fiscal year 13 budget for payment to Department of Boating and Waterways on that loan. And we have an application pending for the next 4 phases of the Marina One project. We're going to try and condense the next 6 phases into 4, and because they kind of like to issue their loans in a 4-phase sort of format. So we're crunching together some of the marina dock fingers and packaging it up in a 4-phase project and reapplying for the next steps. At the next meeting, primarily we will be bringing to you recommended changes, staff's recommended changes to the capital improvement plan that we discussed at the Budget Committee meeting. We have some projects we'd like to reduce or eliminate. We have other projects we'd like to throw additional money at. For example, the Lukes, the self-pay parking systems seem to be working out well. We'd like to accelerate the deployment of those. They're resulting in labor savings as well as extra revenue. So we'd like to push that forward. As I mentioned, we'll bring forward the reserve policies so you can review those. And by then, we should have our final numbers for the 2013 operating as well as capital budget recommendation for your consideration. As I mentioned, the Budget Committee met on Friday. Tonight, we just did an update, brief review. We'll be meeting with Finance Department employees and the City Administrator on the 27th. To go over these items and see if there are any final adjustments coming from that direction. And then we should be able to bring you the full recommendation on the March 15th meeting. And our council work session is for waterfront, airport, and solid waste is scheduled for 9 o'clock on the 2nd of May. And council will adopt the final budget in June. That concludes my portion of the report. I believe the Budget Committee wanted to report out on the last Friday's meeting, so I'll turn it over to the Budget Committee, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions after that.
Thank you very much, Scott. And the Budget Committee of Frank Kelly and Jim Sloan and I met, and would either you, Frank, or Jim like to make a report on it? No, yeah.
I'll just make a comment or two, and then let either of you pick up, because I can't remember everything that we discussed. There were quite a few things, and Scott did a yeoman's job of incorporating a lot of what we discussed into his presentation, so thank you, Scott. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that our packets were all printed, I believe, before the meeting. So things that we discussed and changed in the committee, some of which were substantial, like the breakwater lights in the capital improvement program, which is $360,000 in the handout. The Budget Committee, and I believe the staff recommended, and the Budget Committee agreed that we would not be doing that because we just can't quite get the approval all worked out and so on and so forth. So there will be some significant changes, and as Scott indicated, in capital improvements that you'll see reflected in the final numbers when they come out. And then there were a lot of other things, the discussion of the debt servicing and stuff like that, that you're going to see in the finals. And so it was a very useful meeting. It got lively at times amongst some of the various members, but I think the Finance Committee did a good job. And I would go back to Commissioner Sloan or Chairperson Kramer if they have anything else to add.
I don't really have anything else to add. I think, Scott, you touched on some of the things, and Frank amplified them. I think when we look at it again next month, there will be some of the changes that we talked about, and so I think that's the time to maybe go through them in a little more discussion.
I agree.
One thing I wanted to mention, though, was when we look at maybe paying down some of those notes, we were talking about reducing some of the reserves. Is there a way to take the reserve money and pay that down? I know we've earmarked that for some other things, but it might be something to look at. If we're going to draw down the Harbor Preservation Fund, maybe we could pay down some of the debt with that, or one of the other reserves. I mean, if we have excess reserves, maybe it could go against debt. That was just one of the things I observed tonight. So.
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, we would look at that, and as we all went through at the Budget Committee meeting, that 6-year cash flow program that you've got to get your glasses out to look at all the fine print in that thing. It gets bigger and bigger. But it's just like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. You plug in the numbers and see what comes out the other end, and we can play with that and see, if we can make on one big payment or several smaller payments and try and get some of those high interest notes paid down earlier or completely.
Yeah. I think you're probably looking at it in that light, and I just think it's good that we do look at some of those higher interest notes and see what we can do. So however we can pay them down is great.
And Commissioner Kelly.
And then I just wanted to reiterate, when I look at the interest rates on some of the notes and I look at where a lot of the rates are now, even if it's possible to do a refi in addition to paying down, and I don't know what the terms of our loans are, if we're allowed to do that, not to extend the length of the note, but just to refi it for the same amount at current rates, so that if we could click off even 3/4 of a point or a point, we're saving ourselves $100,000 plus over the life of what's left of the note. So any options that we can do that before interest rates start to move back up would be ideal. Just thought I would throw that in.
Any other questions, comments from commissioners? Commissioner Panlin.
Thanks for the report, Scott. I did have a question about the workers that are going to be coming off furlough. So I assume that's going to be several thousand hours of extra staff time. Do we have a backlog of work? Is there some sort of maybe work program that we have? I mean, I'm just kind of curious, given the extra hours, if there's old work, new work for them to do.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Banaland, the furloughs have impacted our work productivity these last few years. We track it through work orders, preventive maintenance work orders, and we've been falling behind. There's certain metrics we use to track that. So we have gotten behind. We're hoping to keep up or catch up with a lot of that stuff, and then move forward with projects. For example, the Marina 2 redecking project. We can pursue that more aggressively, turn that into a 5-year project instead of a 6-year project. So there's plenty of work to go around in the facilities division. I think we'll make the best of these new circumstances with the reduced furlough or eliminated furlough, hopefully.
And I'd like to add, Waterfront handles it a little different than most of the other city departments in that we're a 7-day-a-week department and we don't close over the holidays and the various furlough closures. We bank our furlough time and take it instead of vacation time or sick time or however, and everybody in our department is responsible for tracking their own time and making sure they burn up it was 104 hours the first year and 98 or something this year. So we don't have those big closures where the department is shut down. Obviously, we can't just have Harbor Patrol go on furlough for a week or something, or shut down the maintenance department. So we're able to manage it fairly effectively that way and get the work done. It has affected, the managers are required to get the work done no matter what, and so, in burning up the furlough, we find ourselves up against the vacation leave balances and so forth. So we've been donating to the catastrophic leave bank or just losing vacation time in some cases. So it'll be nice. I think that citywide, the organization is a little bit tired of working around the furlough the last few years. So it'll be a nice break as we slowly grow out of this situation.
Thanks for that. It's good to hear. Furloughs aren't a very effective tool, I don't think, and it sounds like we have some work for them to do, so thanks for that.
Other questions, comments? And thank you very much for the report, and see you next month on it. So we move on now to Harbor Commission matters and to review the committee member assignments. And
Recommendation with the seating of Commissioner Helene Webb and reappointment of Frank Kelly at the January meeting is appropriate at this time to review and update the membership of various Harbor Commission committees.
I'm not too sure how to proceed. We have Commissioner Anakuchin on a couple of committees which basically haven't met at all. Really, the only ones that meet are the budget and the chartering and the RFP selection committee. And so in order for Helene Webb to be part, maybe somebody wants to give up something or what? Yeah, right. But it's important to note that those committees haven't met.
Well,
Just a function of time.
Well,
I guess I would suggest at this point we can probably eliminate the waterfront director recruitment.
Exactly.
I would hope. And Commissioner Webb has expressed an interest in participating in the dredging committee and the Marina One reconstruction.
Great.
She has an interest in those, so that's good. Although the dredging committee has not had to meet in quite some time, the Marina One reconstruction could be reconvened at any time, depending on Carl's needs in interacting with the slip holders in the next phases that are coming up. So that's a start anyway. I don't know if anybody wants to get off a committee and offer it to...
well, maybe the Marina One reconstruction could also be called Marina Two and Two reconstruction. I mean,
Marina reconstruction.
just, remove the number. Does anyone want to get off? I mean, do you have any interest, Helene, in others? Or? Now, I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Obviously, I am, but...
I'll start with the dredging and the marina reconstruction projects, and then wherever there's a need, I'd be happy to step in.
Great. And I think that we go over all the committee memberships in July. Is that correct? Is that the normal?
Yes, that's the normal time to reassess those. Would anybody like to nominate Commissioner Webb for those committees or take a vote on that?
I will so move that she's nominated to replace the slots that Will used to have on dredging and on the Marina Reconstruction Committee.
And I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
You are a member of the... And so I guess there's no more on that. Does anyone any comments, questions about that? Let's move on to the commission staff communications. Are there any from...
None from staff at this time, Madam Chair.
Any from the Harbor Commission? Nope? Okay, well, then I guess at this
I move
point...
we adjourn.
any
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.